Good morning, everybody. It's Nana. I hope you're all doing really well. I wanted to read you a couple of stories, but I'm going to have to do something kind of different than I did before. These stories are a little longer, so I can only read half, and so that'll be part one, and then I will read the second half, and that'll be part two, and the next two stories will probably be that way. So once you're done with part one, Nana will say, I'm done with part one, and I'm going to turn off the camera, and you'll have to have mom or dad come and turn on part two for you. Okay? I know that's a little strange, but these are really great stories. The first one that I'm going to read to you is called The Christmas Miracle of Jonathan Toomy. Christmas Miracle of Jonathan Toomy. The village children called him Mr. Gloomy, but in fact his name was Toomy, Mr. Jonathan Toomy, and though it's not kind to call people names, this one fit quite well, for Jonathan Toomy seldom smiled and never laughed. He went about grumbling and mumbling and muttering and sputtering and grumping and griping. He complained that the church bells rang too often, that the birds sang too shrilly, that the children played too loudly. Oh my. And there's Mr. Toomy with the wood on his shoulder. And then everybody else, look at the kids. They're kind of watching him. Mr. Toomy was a wood carver. Some said he was the best wood carver in the whole valley. He spent his days sitting at a workbench carving beautiful shapes from blocks of pine and hickory and chestnut wood. After supper, he sat in a straight back chair near the fireplace, smoking his pipe and staring into the flames. Jonathan Toomy wasn't an old man, but if you saw him, you might think he was. The way he walked, bent forward with his head down. You wouldn't notice his eyes, the clear blue of an August sky, and you wouldn't see the dimple on his chin, since his face was mostly hidden under a shaggy, untrimmed beard, speckled with sawdust and wood shavings, and depending on what he ate that day, with crumbs of bread or a bit of potato or even some dried gravy. There he is. Little pieces of wood. You see? See the horse he's carving right here? That's really cool, isn't it? The village people didn't know it, but there was a reason for his gloom, a reason for his grumbling, a reason why he walked hunched over as if carrying a great weight on his shoulders. Some years earlier, when Jonathan Toomy was young and full of life and full of love, his wife and baby had become very sick. And because those were the days before hospitals and medicine and skilled doctors, his wife and his baby both died, 3 days apart from each other. So Jonathan Toomy had packed his belongings into a wagon and traveled until his tears stopped. He settled into a tiny house at the edge of the village to do his wood carving. Oh, he's sad. There's a reason, isn't there? There sure is. One day in early December, there was a knock at Jonathan's door. Mumbling and grumbling, he went to answer it, and there stood a woman and a young boy. I'm the widow McDowell. That means her husband has died. I'm new in your village, and this is my son Thomas, the woman said. I'm 7, said Thomas, and I know how to whistle. Whistling is pish-posh, said the wood carver gruffly. I need something carved, said the woman, and she told Jonathan about a special set of Christmas figures her grandfather had carved for her when she was a girl. After I moved here, I discovered that they were lost, she explained. I hoped that by some miracle I would find them again, but it hasn't happened. There are no such things as miracles, said the wood carver. Now, could you describe the figures for me? There were sheep, she told him. 2 of them, with curly wool, added Thomas. Yes, 2, said the widow. And a cow, an angel, Mary, Joseph, the baby Jesus, and wise men. 3 of them, added Thomas. Will you take the job? Asked the widow McDowell. I will, said Mr. Toomy. I'm grateful. How soon can you have them ready? I must have them by Christmas. They mean very much to me. I can't remember a Christmas without them. Christmases, pish-posh, said Jonathan gruffly, and he shut the door. The following week there was a knock at the woodcarver's door. Muttering and sputtering, he went to answer, and there stood the widow McDowell and Thomas. Excuse me, said the widow, but Thomas has been begging to come and watch you work. He says he wants to be a woodcarver when he grows up. and would like to watch you since you're the very best in the valley. I'll be quiet. You won't even know I'm here. Please, please, piped in Thomas. With a grumble, the woodcarver stepped aside to let them come in. He pointed to a stool next to his workbench. No talking, no jiggling, no noise, he ordered Thomas. I bet you boys can't do that. I don't think Libby could do it either. The widow McDowell thanked Mr. Toomy and handed him a warm loaf of cornbread as a token of her thanks. And then she took out her knitting, sat down in a rocking chair in the far corner of the cottage. Not there, bellowed the woodcarver. No one sits in that chair. So she moved to a straight back chair by the fire. Huh. I wonder why he doesn't want anybody to sit in that chair. I'm trying to see if I can give you guys pictures without glare. Thomas sat very still. Once, when he needed to sneeze, he pressed his finger under his nose to hold it back. Once, when he desperately wanted to scratch his leg, he counted to 20 to keep his mind off the itch. After a long time, Thomas cleared his throat and whispered, Mr. Toomy, may I ask you a question? The woodcarver glared at Thomas, then shrugged his shoulders and grunted, Thomas decided it meant yes, so he went on, Is that my sheep you're carving? The woodcarver nodded and grunted again. Another very long time, and Thomas whispered, Mr. Toomy, excuse me, but you're carving my sheep wrong. The widow McDowell's knitting needles stopped clicking. Jonathan Toomey's knife stopped carving, but Thomas went on, It's a beautiful sheep, nice and curly, but my sheep looked happy. That's pish-posh, said Mr. Toomy. Sheep are sheep, they cannot look happy. Mine did, said Thomas, and they knew they were with the baby Jesus, so they were happy. After that, Thomas was quiet for the rest of the afternoon, and when the church bells chimed 6 o'clock, Mr. Toomy grumbled under his breath about the awful noise. The widow McDowell said it was time to leave. Thomas sneezed 3 times and then thanked the woodcarver for allowing him to watch. That afternoon, after a supper of cornbread and boiled potatoes, the woodcarver sat down at his bench. He picked up his knife, and he picked up the sheep. He worked until his eyelids drooped shut. There he is. He's telling him about his sheep. He said his sheep were happy, huh? Because they were with the baby Jesus. A few days later, there was a knock at the woodcarver's door. Grumbling and griping again, he went to answer it. There stood the widow and her son. May I watch? I'll be very quiet, said Thomas. He settled himself on the stool very quietly while his mother laid a basket of sweet-smelling raisin buns on the table. The teapot is warm, said Mr. Toomy gruffly, his head bent over his work. While Mr. Toomy carved, the widow McDowell poured tea. She touched the woodcarver gently on the shoulder and placed a cup of tea and a bun next to him. He pretended not to notice, but soon both the plate and the cup were empty. Thomas tried to eat the bun his mother had given him as quietly as he could, but it was almost impossible to be 7 and eat a warm, sticky bun without making various smacking and licking and satisfied noises. When Thomas had finished, he tried to sit quietly. Once more, he almost hiccuped, but he took a deep breath and held it till his face turned red. And once, without thinking, he began to swing his legs, but a glare from the woodcarver stopped him, and so he kept them very still until they fell asleep. Have you ever had your legs fall asleep? And then when they wake up, they pick and they tingle? Yeah, he's eating a really good-looking bun, isn't he? Looks really good. After a long time, Thomas whispered, Mr. Toomy, excuse me, but may I ask you a question? Grunt. Is that my cow you're carving? A nod and another grunt. Another very long time went by. Then Thomas cleared his throat and said, Mr. Toomy, excuse me, but I must tell you something. That is a beautiful cow, the most beautiful cow I have ever seen, but it's not right. My cow looked proud. That's pish-posh, growled the woodcarver. Cows are cows. They cannot look proud. Thomas was quiet for the rest of the afternoon, and the only sounds that could be heard were the scraping of the carving knife, the humming of the widow McDowell, and the click-click of her knitting needles. When the church bells chimed 6 o'clock, Mr. Toomy muttered under his breath about the noise. The widow McDowell said it was time to leave. Thomas shook first one leg and then the other. He thanked the woodcarver for allowing him to watch. That evening, after a supper of boiled potatoes and raisin buns, the woodcarver sat down at his bench. He picked up his carving knife, he picked up the cow, and he worked until his eyelids drooped. See? He worked into the dark time, didn't he? See the village? There's snow, and it's dark. Oh, and right in the front is the church where the bell rings. A few days later, there was a knock on the woodcarver's door. He smoothed down his hair as he went to answer it. At the door were the widow and Thomas. As Mrs. McDowell warmed the tea and put a plate of fresh molasses cookies on the workbench, Thomas watched the woodcarver work on the figure of an angel. After a long time, Thomas spoke. Mr. Toomy, excuse me, is that my angel you're carving? Yes, and would you do me the favor of telling me exactly what I'm doing wrong, said Mr. Toomy. Well, my angel looked like one of God's most important angels. It was sent to baby Jesus. And just how does one make an angel look important? Asked the woodcarver. You'll be able to do it, said Thomas. You're the best woodcarver in the valley. Another very long time passed and Thomas spoke. Mr. Toomy, excuse me, can I please ask you a question? Do you ever stop talking? Asked the woodcarver. My mom says I don't. She says I could learn about the virtue of silence from you. Under his beard, the woodcarver's face turned pink. The widow McDowell's face turned red as the scarf she was knitting. Will you speak up? What is your question? Will you please teach me how to carve? I'm a very, very busy man, grumbled the woodcarver, but he put down that most important angel. You will carve a bird. A robin, I hope, said Thomas. I like robins. And that's the end of part 1.